Manhattan Stardust, Chapter 4, The Art of Deduction. Listen, I never believed my ex-lawyer girlfriend Doreen or my ex-cross-dressing therapist Jessica when they intimated that cigars were never just cigars. Come to think of it, if they had said that girlfriends were never just girlfriends and cross-dressing therapists were never just therapists, I would have had no trouble. The cigar, however, is another thing, but maybe that proves their point, because I'm an almost believer now. I suppose you might attribute this volte-face, as Geneviève has occasionally said in her natural rather than studied French, to a seismic jolt in the forest of Arden. And I'm not sure where to begin, so I'll follow Jasper's advice and go postmodern and hope that the strong reader won't have too much of a problem flexing the neurons to piece it all together. Let me start where my boss Bernie comes in, somewhere in the middle. "What's eating at you, Gary?" he said one morning as he peered over the wall of my cubicle at the firm. It wasn't often he left his room with the only view of Manhattan and our floor, so I responded with a bit of a twitch. "Nothing, Bernie." "Don't give me that nothing," he replied in his monogrammed cuffs, Brooks Brothers pinstripes, and Windsor knot. "Did I mess something up?" "That's the problem. You're too goddamn perfect lately. You're putting us all to shame. You're in here earlier than anybody else, and you're out of here later than me. It's not healthy. Come on, let's take a walk and grab a cup." It was true. I was probably a little more focused than usual on decimal points and the other fine points of arithmetic over the past few months. Probably because I always found the black and white of our work a kind of port in a storm. Things could get messy out there in the outside world, even out there in the inside one of Shangri-La, but on the clean slate of a computer screen spreadsheet, all the rows and columns lined up, and all the numbers came to an unerring conclusion when you added or subtracted them. In the crowded, fluorescently lit and noisy interior of our local Dunkin' Donuts, Bernie kept up the pressure. "What's the problem, Gary? Girls?" I must have twitched involuntarily again, because he followed this sally with a pinch on the cheek. I was used to his winks, but this was new, and a long, audible sigh. "Let me guess. You can't keep up with the two of them, you son of a gun. Here, try some of these." And he shoved out a handful of little blue pills, the kind that were strewn all over Svetlana's hotel room during my sister's plastic surgery symposium. "No, Bernie, it's not that." "I see," he said at length, frowning. "Trouble in paradise." "Yeah, I guess you could say so. Cough it up. Maybe I can help." So I did, the short-form submission, and even my unflappable boss flapped as he sat watching me tear the plastic lid of my coffee cup to bits. Then, rousing himself to his avuncular best, he squeezed my neck and invited me out to a drink after work so I could give him the full Monty. "For this, we'll need some cigars. I'm telling you, never underestimate the power of a cigar. And for you, because you're family," he winked, "I'll break out the Cubans. Just remember, kid, we accountants are the foundation of every good goddamn thing that goes on in this crazy world. And in that crazy world of yours, too." It all began not too long ago when I got home one day after work and heard Miranda upbraiding Jennifer for stretching out the calves in a pair of her Italian boots. Something didn't seem right. The girls shared the same shoe size, and it was short work for one musketeer to slip into the other's footwear and think nothing of it. All for one for all, that sort of thing. True, Miranda, who weighed in at 110 pounds dripping wet, had a set of pins a tad sleeker than Jennifer's, but this had never caused a contretemps before. When Jennifer, who had a bit more leg to her leg and bosom to her bosom than Miranda, said it wouldn't take much to fill out Miranda's bras, I jumped into the ring and sent them both to their corners. Yes, something was fishy, but what? And here's where I drew on my professional expertise to make a deduction. There was an extra ripple rippling the shoreline of Shangri-La. Jennifer had recently landed a co-starring role in an off-Broadway production of a two-hander that actually included four hands, but never mind. The point is that it all started to add up. So I tactfully tendered the idea that maybe Miranda, who in the past had her own theatrical aspirations, well, maybe, if you think I'm jealous of her for that ridiculous part in that awful play, Gary, think twice. I'm not. The awful play was a play I'd never heard of before, but its title had a dystopian, utopian ring, from what Jennifer described, and its director had a Valhalla air about him, also as Jennifer described, and he happened to be in the other and only co-starring role. Miranda stalked out with the deformed boots to see if she could bring them back, as she said, and Jennifer merely shrugged. Eventually, peace regained supremacy, but after we retired, I was definitely a middleman all through the night. 2 weeks later, however, there wasn't much middle to speak of anymore because Jennifer had decided to take the spare bedroom to herself, leaving Miranda and me together alone. As Jennifer took pains to explain, the timing had to do with the play and the stress of having to stay up late learning lines. She still had her money-changing day job, by the way, and getting into her character's quote-unquote zone. Can't you get into the zone in our zone? I naively inquired. Jennifer replied with a warmth that felt like Arctic air. Look, this is a big deal, and I thought we all agreed to a little flexibility. Yeah, said Miranda, like my boots. But definitely not like your bras, Jennifer countered. Miranda had the grace to ignore the remark and let Jennifer hoist herself up by her own petard. I thought we all agreed that there would be times when we needed to do things a little differently, when we needed a little space. The whole way to make this work is to let each other do their thing, isn't it? As long as we were honest about it. Right, Gary? Absolutely, I replied. Honesty. That word again. Otherwise, we'd suffocate. Anyway, I don't know why this is such a big deal. It's only a temporary thing. And here she actually spelled out the word temporary, which I thought was a bit much, but what could I do about it? Adding, maybe you don't understand how hard it is to expose yourself on stage. I bit my tongue. I didn't have the heart just then to make a joke that wouldn't be funny. It felt a bit strange, just Miranda and me at night, but there was also something sweet and adventurous about the one-on-one, the first few weeks at least. But no matter how you looked at it, one-on-one never amounted to what we had before, and I got to wondering just how couples did it, or tried to do it. Maybe that explained the failure rates, divorce, and whatnot. I knew from basketball that there were only so many one-on-one games you could play without getting bored to death or getting angry. Until now, it seemed that our shifting tag team of the 2-on-1 with one for all had been working mighty fine. As the novelty of our new situation lost its novelty, neither Miranda nor I would say outright that we thought we were losing Jennifer, but we thought it. Jennifer was hardly here anymore. She flew back to the apartment after work to change, never able to stay for dinner, rushed out into town to rehearse, and then got home awfully late to her separate bedroom, until one night she didn't get back till morning, and the morning after that she asked for a sabbatical. As I've said before, the commune was, after all, an experiment, and experiments are experiments whose results, if they're real experiments, are experimental. That's why the scientific types do them, to find out what's going to happen, not to prove what they already know because they don't know what they think they know for certain. I'd scoured my mother's libraries for tomes on Erewhons and Atlantises and Mokshas and Nirvanas and Oleanas and all the other heavens on, above, or beyond our measly earth. And they were pretty stale, mainly because unchanging bliss invariantly turned into something else. That's why, when the triumvirate plotted strategy at the outset, we figured on such eventualities as voluntary sabbaticals, in theory at least. Sure, Miranda said. Go for it, I added. Thanks, guys, Jennifer responded. As a goodwill gesture, Miranda gave Jennifer the boots she had ruined, and I gave Jennifer an awkward hug, and Jennifer bolted out like a deer who smelled gunpowder during hunting season. As soon as she'd left, Miranda lit into me for not putting up more of a fight. Don't you know anything about women? She hissed. Sometimes we need to feel needed. I thought wanting was good enough. It isn't. So what do you want me to do? Be a little more of a man, Gary. What does that mean? Being more of a man got me in trouble, I thought. A real man. And that night I was, I guess, more of a man, and she was more of a woman, both of us more or less, because we were both on our own. Eventually, Miranda and I simply resigned ourselves to making the most of it. She whipped out the violin, and I whipped out my number 2 pencils, and we did things just like couples in the outside world do, like have other couples over for dinner and pretend to have a grand old time, and we soldiered on. Jasper still had some tentacles in the realms of theater, and at one of our foursomes he babbled on a bit after his first bottle of wine about Jennifer's new play and her new co-star, Gerhard, whom I really didn't want to know about. He's big, muscular, and smart, said Jasper, and he's done some good shows. Oh. Reminds me of D'Artagnan, come to think of it. Gee, D'Artagnan, you know, Gary, the 4th Musketeer. Hey, Miranda, darling, can you fill up my glass with a little more of that red, please? Which was when Miranda poured the remainder of a very decent Pinot Noir on his head, much to Emilio's delight. The worst of it all was that no matter which parents Miranda and I consulted, we got the same response. From hers, it was a haughty, "We told you so," followed by an intimation that they were praying for me to leave next. And from mine, mother and father separately, it was a simpler, couldn't last, get real, in their own words, which I wanted to hear about as much as I wanted to hear about Gerhard. Strangely enough, it was my boss Bernie who cheered us on. After our second brandy, he asked me to tell him about the play. You see, he was a New York theater type, the kind that keep the scalpers in business, the kind who are willing to pay top dollar at the last minute on a whim to see a show that's rumored to have the goods, the kind that like nothing better than to catch it before it gets to Broadway, so they can say they were there first. I knew about his 3 wives and families, and now I was learning a little about his 4th as we finished our first Esplendidos. She's into string quartets, Gary, but I love her anyway. Me, I'll be honest, I like the stage. We humor each other. Anyway, you were saying something about Jennifer's play. I think I've seen it before. He ordered another round of brandies, and while he was clipping the ends of another pair of cohibas, he looked at me with what I thought could have been a gleam or glimmer in his eyes, but it could have been a mirage through the cigar smoke. He seemed eerily philosophical. Don't give up, he said after several puffs. Cut her some slack, both of you, and before you know it, she'll be swimming back into the harem. But what if she doesn't? Then it wasn't meant to be. And then what? Then enjoy what you have. It's win-win either way. If you try to force her hand, she'll bite it off to spite her face. Huh? Relax, kid. She's getting her feet wet. She's spreading her wings, that's all. Haven't you had the itch? I confessed I had scratched a bit. See what I mean? But it was different with me. What made it different? It was more like fate, Bernie. Listen, even women have fate. You can't argue with fate. I'm not arguing, I'm worrying. So stop worrying. That's the problem, I can't, and neither can Miranda. For crying out loud, kid, argue, worry, whatever, but don't blubber. Come on, let's get a cab. So we got a cab, and I finally introduced Bernie to Miranda, and Bernie offered her a Cuban too, which she smoked to the nub or stub or rub. And soon she and Bernie were trading quips about politics and interest rates and twofers, and Bernie was eating her up with his eyes, and I didn't mind it one bit because it was more appreciation than anything else, and pride in his surrogate son, who was me. When midnight rolled around and Miranda surprised Bernie with the Armagnac she stashed for special occasions, he whipped out a Romeo y Julieta that we'd have to share because he'd only had one left, and once he lit it, he said, "Gary, let me ask you a question." He took a puff, solemnly, and then handed the hand-rolled delicacy over to me. "Sure, Bernie." I coughed and passed the cigar to Miranda. "What would you do if I started to cuss out Miranda right in front of your eyes, right here and now?" "What? You heard me. But you never do that, Bernie." "I know. I'm asking you a hypothetical. Just tell me, what would you do? What would you do if me, your boss, the guy you actually like, you like me, don't you, kid?" I nodded. Miranda nodded too and returned the Romeo and Julieta to my boss. "Okay, what would you do, kid, if where was I?" Miranda piped up, "If you said something naughty to me?" No, get serious. But I like that. Gary, she's got a sense of humor. Listen to me, Gary. Don't you ever let her get away from you. Do you hear me? Now, let's get serious. "I'm serious, Bernie," said Miranda, winking, taking back the cigar. "Good. And you're also adorable. Gary, what did I tell you, you lucky stiff? Don't you ever let her go. Do you hear me? Now, back to serious." He gathered himself for another charge, and this time he made it over the hump. "What would you do if me, Bernie, your boss, a guy you like very much, right now decided to cuss out your gorgeous lover," added Miranda, rather sweetly, I thought. "Your gorgeous lover right in front of you. What would you do?" He offered me another puff. "I'd probably ask you to stop." I handed him the cigar, which he ceded to Miranda. "No, you wouldn't. Miranda, tell him. What would he do?" Miranda drew deeply and exhaled. "He'd belt you," she said. "Exactly." Then Bernie started to chuckle, and now that the Romeo y Julieta was finished, Miranda brought out something else to puff, and through the haze of smoke and the glasses of Armagnac flowing freely in the early morning hours, Bernie said the play would be the thing, repeatedly. And he laughed a lot, too, and we ordered several pizzas, and by the time we called a cab for him, it was nearly dawn. I woke up at noon the next day and frantically reached for the phone to call into work and tell them I was running late, until Miranda pulled me back to bed, reminding me that it was Saturday, and pulling me even closer, added that whatever happened wouldn't be so bad no matter what. And man, did I agree. We were there on opening night, Miranda and I and Jasper and Emilio and Bernie with his new and fourth wife. I was surprised. The two wives I had seen before were the type who loved very long furs in winter and very short skirts, mothers or not, during the warm season. And this one was dressed in what I'd call student threads, and she was probably closer to 40 than to 30, which added to the exceptional status. Bernie, who was pushing 60, by the way, winked just as the lights went down and the play began. I was thinking about Jennifer, the Jennifer I discovered playing a Juliet in an amateur production who taught the torches to burn bright. She was so damn talented. And when she came on with her co-starring actor-director Gerhard, naturally I couldn't take my eyes off her. But the funny thing was that this Jennifer, for all her curves and dramatic expression, she just seemed to be fizzling. She obviously knew her lines, and she spoke them fairly trippingly and suited the word to the action and all that stuff, but the sum of it all was a zero, which was incomprehensible. Gerhard, impressive as he was in the looks department, happened to be as stiff and as genuine as particle board when it came to acting. Emilio looked at me, and I looked at him, and he looked at Jasper, and Jasper looked at Miranda, who looked at Emilio, and I could see Bernie glancing our way too from time to time. The play featured a teacher and a student and was full of heartfelt expostulations and accusations and revelations, and it wore on without intermission to a point where I was rudely jolted into wakefulness to find that Gerhard was cursing Jennifer, who was now cowering on the floor and held a chair suspended above his head. It was at that point, apparently, that my suspension of disbelief must have turned into a suspension of belief, because before the chair had a chance to be unsuspended, play or no play, I had upended Gerhard with a right cross, and the audience erupted into applause, and Bernie whisked me out before the cops arrived. A week later, Jasper called and said, "Hold on," and Jennifer was on the line, and I said, "Hold on," and got Miranda on speakerphone, and Jennifer said through the cat hair atmosphere that she was sorry and could we meet. And when we met, the three of us, we heard each other out. We weren't starting out from scratch, but we were starting out, the nuts and bolts, and in the give and take we all felt mighty good again about our world. A world in which accountants, as I told Bernie, handing him a box of illegal stogies that had cost me a week's pay, weren't just accountants. "Where do you think deduction comes from anyway?" he replied.